to The Plain Truth, the show where we get into some of the mysteries, anomalies, and the just general unusual stuff in the world around us. I'm your host, Paul, and joining us this week, we have a guest, Lori Williams, who has worked as a teacher in the remote viewing world and, well, many other things. Quite a background. Lori, are you there?
Yes, I am, Paul. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming. We appreciate it. And joining us for the ride is my friend Melody. Melody, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, well, Lori, thanks for coming. We had you on before, and so people might be aware of your work. But if they aren't, could you give us just a brief intro to yourself?
Sure. My name's Lori Williams, and I am the Executive Director of Intuitive Specialists. And Intuitive Specialists is a company that provides remote viewing services and remote viewing instruction. And I was the executive director of mission centers in Latin America for about 20 years. I did social work and the director of a refugee program here in the United States for many years, doing workshops and presenting shops on grant writing and grant management. And I got into teaching remote viewing in 2001 after studying it from 1996.
Okay. And so you've been teaching for quite a while now, right?
Yeah, I've been teaching for about 13 years, teaching remote viewing, which, of course, is all tied into intuition. So.
Yeah, well, today's show, we were going to try to focus on intuition, how to view it, how maybe to make it better or understand it or something like that. So that's, in a sense, we might be talking about intuition a lot more than remote viewing. But, of course, with such a strong background in remote viewing, it's going to be a little bit hard to totally separate the topics. Before we get too far in, do you want to tell people about your website so they could, find out about your company and what you've been doing there?
Sure, Paul. Our website is www.intuitivespecialists with an S at the end of specialists.com. So that's www.intuitivespecialists.com.
Okay, thanks. And now let's get into that great mystery in the sky called intuition a little bit. Do you have any thoughts on where that comes from? How is it that sometimes we know what's going to happen just in our gut? What is a gut feeling, do you think? It's a very wide topic, but
it is. I was thinking about this before we got online together, and I feel like intuition is really something that is inherently part of who we are, and it comes from, for lack of a better way to explain it, the great big cosmic database in the sky, which is a funny way to say it, but in reality, even science, quantum physics, and things like that are starting to show that somehow we are connected through the subconscious mind to all the knowledge that ever is or ever was. And so sometimes to help people understand that better, I say, imagine that your subconscious mind is just plugged into this big cosmic database that has all the information that ever was or ever will be. And we're plugged in. So we automatically have access to all that information. And that's what intuition is.
Well, this sounds a little bit like the Akashic Records idea or something.
I think it is kind of like the Akashic Records. Some people, I've been meeting a lot of people lately who are like, what are the Akashic Records? They've never heard of them. So I kind of try to reach an audience that would understand anything, maybe people who haven't heard of the Akashic Records. But basically, it's just the idea that everything that's ever happened and that ever will happen, and that could get into a whole discussion on time and what time is, but everything that exists, all knowledge, exists and is there. Even knowledge that to us hasn't happened yet, but actually probably has happened. I mean, there's a big belief that all of time is sort of layered on top of each other and is happening simultaneously. So if all that knowledge is there and we're all connected on some way, it's like we're all connected in a cosmic consciousness or group consciousness way, then we all have access to this information. The trick is how do we get in touch with it? How do we utilize it?
Yeah, and also how do we not override it? I think that in my case, sometimes mistakes I knew that my gut feeling said not to do something, but I did it.
Oh, we've all been there, I think. I think we've all been there. And afterwards you're like, why didn't I listen to him? I knew better. Even things like, do I turn right or do I turn left? Do I take, this street to get to where I'm going, or should I take that street? When you have several different choices, and we've all had that time where we just knew today we should take a certain way, but instead we took the other way, and we had an accident or ran into a delay, and we were kicking ourselves for not listening to our inner gut.
Well, I suppose it might be worth asking if there are any, I don't know, exercises or practices, things like that you've found that kind of help people.
There are a lot of exercises. And if you don't mind, before we talk about exercises, if we can talk a little bit more about what intuition is and how it works, because before we can explain the exercises, people have to kind of understand how intuition works. And the reason, because some people might be thinking, okay, well, if intuition's there and we all have it, then how come how come it's not just there for me, And I think the reason for that is because people have to understand that the subconscious mind and the conscious mind just don't speak the same language. And so, yet at the same time, the subconscious is the 99% of who we are. We think we have an idea. I think I'm Lori Williams, but reality, the Lori Williams that I know is really just a tiny part known as the ego. And that's my conscious mind. And it thinks it's running the show, and it thinks it knows who I am. But in reality, it's the subconscious mind is the really the thing that's running the show behind the scenes. And so how do we get these two talking to each other? That's the key. And that's what will lead us into the exercises that will help all the listeners to develop their intuition. So is it okay if we talk about that a little bit, about what?
Yeah, I wanted to go back and forth, but let's just go into it, the whole grand scheme of the subconscious, because some people don't even think about it very much.
That's true. But you know what? Everybody's had the experience of having a clutching in their chest when they're scared, for example, or that tightening of the belly. Or how about when you start falling in love and you get the butterflies? Or, maybe you meet the one, and the minute you lay eyes on this person, something tells you this person's going to be very important in my life, and you get that butterfly feeling. So all of us experience some kind of intuition, even if we haven't called it that, or we didn't realize it, or we never put it into actual words. We realize that, gosh, all of us have experienced something where our bodies reacted in some way. We used to play a game with our kids that was really fun. We would put a bowl of Skittles on the table, and we would have one of the kids be blindfolded, and then that kid would pick up a Skittle and try to sense what color the Skittle was. And so it was a really fun way to develop a form of intuition through the body. And they would try to sense the color of the Skittle. So we would start out by saying, well, and this is an exercise anyone could do, really. Does it feel like a cold color or a hot color? And then they would open their hand and see if it was green, blue, purple, or brown. I don't know if there are brown Skittles, but, one of those darker colors, that would be a cool color. But if it was red, yellow, orange, that would be a warm color. And either way, they got to eat the Skittle, which, of course, was the big reward. But then they would try, after they got really good at distinguishing warm colors versus cool colors, then they started getting to where they could actually sense the real color. And they got very good at sensing the colors, saying, yeah, this color feels, this feels like blue. This feels like green. This one feels red. This one feels yellow.
Maybe they like Skittles.
That was a great motivator, because they really did like Skittles. You can do them with M&Ms, but they do melt in your hand, not like the commercials used to say. And so, so it was easier to do them with Skittles. But yeah, they really liked Skittles. So we would play this game. And so the reason I like to mention the games that we could play is because anybody could do these games. It's a fun way to do the games to help heighten your physical senses. If the body is the link between conscious and subconscious, then we want to play games that are going to heighten those senses and you're going to get better at it. Another thing that's really fun to do is if you have a room that has a lot of doors. Now, not everybody has a room with a lot of doors. We happen to have a master bedroom that has a door that leads out to a balcony, a door that leads to the bathroom, 3 closet doors, and then a door that leads to the hallway. And so it would be really fun to bring someone in, have them be blindfolded, have someone hiding behind one of the doors, and then have the person with the blindfold put out their hand and kind of turn slowly in a circle and see if they could sense in their hand the energy of that person and point in the direction where the person was hiding. And that's a really great way to increase your intuition, because imagine if you did that a lot, you practice that a lot. There's some really practical things you can automatically come to mind, like you come into your house one night, you're alone and you walk in the dark and there's someone hiding and you instantly sense their presence because you're so practiced at feeling people's energy. Does that make sense?
Sure, makes a lot of sense. The sky's the limit with that. You could, but anyway, people definitely have an energy, right? It changes the whole atmosphere of the room,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
That's another thing, is that different types of buildings, when you're inside or near them, have a totally different ambiance.
Exactly. Everything is made up of energy. And so what we're trying to do when we want to develop our intuition is we want to be more aware of our energy and the way that we interpret energy through our body. And by doing that, you're definitely going to heighten, as you heighten your awareness, you're going to automatically heighten your sense of intuition. And you can do it with fun games. One of the most common ones, my friend Becky Yeagers, who used to run the USI squad, she passed away several years ago, I think about 10 years ago now. She used to talk about how one of the ways she developed her intuition was that she had a girlfriend. She was a happily married lady, and she had a best friend who was female, and they would talk on the phone every day. And they used to just talk and gossip. When they started getting into wanting to develop intuition, they would call each other and describe what the other person was wearing. And that was a great way to develop your visual intuition, because we're all different types of learners, right? So teachers, any of the teachers out there listening would recognize when we talk about auditory learners, visual learners, and kinesthetic learners. So just that in itself, intuition aside, tells you that all of us have a brain that seems to work better in one way or another. So some people are very visual and see everything in their mind. So when they park their cars, they mentally imagine where their cars park, and they can see it in their minds. They go to the paint store to paint a room, and they can visualize that their white living room is soon going to be painted red, and things like that. So those are visual people. And then and you can take that sense of visual acuity and turn that into a development exercise for intuition. So let's say, for example, you are in the grocery store and there's a lot of people. It's a busy time of day and there's a lot of people in the grocery store, and all the checkout lines have a lot of people in them. And you want to get in a line that's going to get you through the fastest. So you say to yourself, okay, the line that's going to get me through quickest is going to flash. I'm going to see like a flash of light when I look at it. And then you just kind of use your imagination, and as you quickly scan the lines, you just imagine that one of them lit up. And then you get in that line and pay attention and see if that one really does get you through quicker than the other lines would have had you chosen a different line. That takes paying attention to how many people are in each line, and and how quickly they get through, who's the last person in each line when you get in, so you know whether you really did get through the quickest. And you can do that at the bank as well. You can use color instead of a flash of light. Like I'm going to see a flash of red, or I'm going to see if that line's going to look blue to me or something. For people who are auditory, you could do the same exercises, but instead of using light or color, you could say, okay, this time I'm going to hear a ding sound, like ding. So when I look at this line, I'm going to hear a ding. And the line that's going to get me through the quickest. And so you can use sounds. Any sound would work. Whatever sound you're most attuned to. Like a mom might say, okay, I'm going to hear the sound of a baby crying. You can also use your sensory. If you're a kinesthetic person, like a touchy-feely kind of a person, then you could just put your hand out. Of course, this could look a little odd if you're standing in a bank or a grocery store, but you could gently just put your palm forward and say, the line that's going to get me through the quickest is going to feel warmer. I'm going to feel a sense of warmth in my hand when I've got my hand extended towards the line that's going to get me through the quickest. And so we call that the hot spot method, using a warm spot or a warm sensation on your hand.
Now, somebody who develops that could use it for other things, like on a map, right?
Yes,
Finding
like
something.
on a map. And I'm a hypnotherapist as well, and I use that a lot with people who have test anxiety. I've created a test that they can't possibly know the answer to, that just has the answers to, that just has like personal questions on it that have to do with my family and names in my family. So I tell them, there's no way you can know the answer to these questions. It's a multiple choice test, but let's use some sensory mechanisms to see if you can get the answers right. And it's actually quite amazing. Most people can get about 2/3 of the answers right, just guessing, using either hotspot, a flash of color or light, or a sound. And then by doing the test, that seeing which ones they got right the most easily, then we can also tell which of those sensory mechanisms work best in that person. So it's a real interesting thing to do, and it helps to alleviate test anxiety, because that way, it was a really funny. My husband had a background in medicine. He had taken pre-med, and I had no background in medicine. And when we decided we wanted to get licensed in massage therapy, so we went to massage school, and we had to study, anatomy and physiology. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how long it's been since I've been at school, and I felt like my brain was atrophied, And so when we went to take the state licensing exam, I was quite nervous about it, because I was like, oh gosh, this stuff is all, really new to me, and what if I failed the test and I didn't get my license? And I knew that my husband would probably ace the test, because all this was old news to him. Well, the very first question that came up, and it turned out that we both were given the same test. And the very first question that came up, neither one of us had a clue, and it wasn't anything we had studied. It wasn't on any of the practice tests we had taken. So I used the hotspot method on the screen of the computer, and then chose my answer, and I got the answer right. And he got it wrong, and because he didn't know it either, and he didn't use the hotspot method or any other method. He just, took a wild guess. And so I actually ended up doing better than he did on the test by one question, and it was that question. But the only way that I got it right was by using that method. So so it's a way of using intuition to help improve your test scores. Or like you said, you could use it on a map. In fact, a lot of intuitives nowadays and remote viewers would use, for example, the baby crying sound on a map in trying to locate a kidnapped child, for example. So I'm going to pass my hand over the map, and when I hear a baby crying, I'm going to put my finger right on that spot, and X marks the spot, get the GPS coordinates, and give that to the police.
I guess you said it was students answering questions about you or your family or something like that?
Yes.
Do certain things have a stronger connection? I don't know how to put that, but let's say, for example, somebody has siblings, brothers and sisters, and then a question about your brothers and sisters, they have a higher percentage of accuracy than, for example, somebody who doesn't. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I totally see that. I do not know that would really, in my experience, I haven't seen any kind of a connection that way. What the connection I see is that if a person tends to be very visual, they'll do well trying to see a flash of light or a color, but maybe they won't do well with the sound or the hotspot. Or someone who tends to be really kinesthetic, hands-on. I don't learn very well from listening to you or watching or hearing you or seeing a video, but I can really learn if I see you do it. Those are the kinesthetic, hands-on, or if you let me do it and you guide me as I'm doing it. Those are the kinesthetic people. They often do better with a hot spot or a sensory mechanism. I'm going to feel a rough spot or a smooth spot or a cold spot or a hot spot. And then there's the people who are very, very auditory, and they tend to really respond to the sense of cold or hot.
Okay.
I'm sorry, they tend to respond to the sounds. You know, I'm going to hear a ding sound. I'm going to hear a baby cry.
Okay. Well, it makes sense. I was just curious if people have kind of even a deeper connection that, like psychologically they're interested in certain things and that makes their scores be better.
Well, you know, it's interesting though. I do think that your question really applies in some other areas. I was working with Lisa Williams, who is a well-known. She's no relation to me. She's a British medium, and I was working with her one weekend. We were doing some advanced mediumship stuff, and she was talking about how for years she had worked in an airplane factory, and her job was to put the rivets in the windshields of these airplanes, these small airplanes. And she, different models of airplanes would use different types of rivets, and she got to where she knew all the different rivets. And this one's the W340 rivet, and this one's the, so they all had names, and she knew all these rivets. So then years later, she's working as a medium, and this man comes in and is sitting there in front of her and wanting to get in touch with his brother or something who had passed on. And she suddenly sees like this type of rivet, and she says, "Oh, I'm seeing the W350 rivet that goes on the Piper 450 aircraft." She just, I'm making all this up, of course, but she tells him this type of aircraft, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, that's the aircraft that my brother flew." And if it hadn't been for the rivet, which she had great familiarity with, she may not have gotten that. She might have been able to say, "I'm seeing an aircraft," but she was actually specifically able to tell him what type of aircraft because of the rivet that she saw in her mind's eye. And another story about she knew she'd actually trained as one of her students a man who had been a mail carrier for 25 years, and he ran the same route for 25 years. So he knew all the houses on that route and all their addresses. And so then after he retired, he became a medium and was working as a medium. And this woman, he was reading for this woman, and he said, "Oh, I'm seeing the house at 2554 Ridge Court." And she just about flew out of her chair because that was her house. And she was like, "How could this total stranger know my address?" She thought, that's really specific. Well, he knew it because it was on his mail route that he had done for 25 years, and somehow that house had popped up and he knew the address of the house, and it just so happened she had just bought the house. And, so it was really, it is true that you can really get great information if you have familiarity. So in the sense that you were saying, like if you had brothers and sisters or something you were very passionate about, you might be more likely to do well in that subject.
Do some of your students find that they have different experiences in terms of the auditory or the feeling impressions depending on what it is they're doing? Because I know that most of the time I'm sitting here knitting and I'm thinking, yep, I'm the one you have to like take my hands and show me what to do before I can warp the loom or put the knitting needles on, and then I can go back to a book and understand it. But until then, it makes no sense, just trying to read about it or something. But I know that, and if I'm working with clients and things, a lot of times I just sort of feel things, and it's almost like I can feel something move or something like clicks. And it's not quite a sound, but I feel it. On the other hand, I'm also trained in trance and trance work. And if I'm in a trance and someone asks me a question in the Norse trance work I've been taught to do, I see the whole movie and I feel everything. And it's like I'm there, but I see these amazing, almost, they're inside my mind's eye. But they're not just totally originating with me. It's like something takes over, and it's like I can see these amazing motion pictures. But I saw it, but it depends kind of on what I'm doing. So I'm wondering if you've noticed that at all, or
Yes, definitely. I think definitely, and I've experienced the same thing. And I've noticed with the students too, there is a point at which it's sort of like you mentioned the click. There's a point at which there's a shift, and they go from just kind of being on the surface of something and just sort of rambling about it to really having deep contact with it. Does that make sense? So that they're really interacting, and at that point they have what we call an aesthetic impact with the whatever it is that they're trying to pick up on. If they're trying to remote view a target site, or if they're trying to do mediumship and connect with a relative who's passed over, or do a psychic reading for someone, regardless, all of these are tied into intuition. All of these use intuition as their medium for getting information out. And so, or picking up on information. And so when these things are going on, when someone is trying to get information in this way, just as you mentioned, it can come in many different ways. And you were talking about doing trance and seeing it almost like a movie. And that I've experienced that as well. And in the remote viewing world, we sometimes refer to that as, that can be part of a type of remote viewing that we call extended remote viewing, or ERV. And my husband and I were joking about that a few months ago and saying, I can see why they call them psychic readings, because it's almost like you're reading the information as it's coming across. And right before we started the interview, I went for a walk with my husband, and we were talking about the interview. And we were talking about the difference between imagination and intuition. And a lot of people will have an experience like you just mentioned, Melody, where they feel like they're almost watching a movie, but then they find out that the things they saw weren't exactly verbatim what the information was. Does that make sense? I mean, maybe it was symbolic, or, and so sometimes your information will be exactly literal. Like one day when I was just lying down for a nap in my mother's house, and I suddenly had a very striking visual of my mother's house in flames. And I jumped up. I mean, it startled me so bad that I suddenly jumped up onto my feet and ran out of the room. And as I ran out, I passed the bathroom. The bathroom door was open, and there was a towel that was bursting into flames as I walked by. And it had, my little toddler had gone in and turned on a wall heater, and the towel was hanging in front of it. And the towel was just bursting into flames as I walked past it. And so I grabbed it and put it out, and I knew that was immediately why I had this sudden frightening visual of my mother's house in flames. And so that turned out to be a literal warning. I mean, my mother's house was not in flames, but the towel was bursting in flames. So some people will have literal visual things, and then other people will have symbolic visual things. And so it becomes really an important thing to learn to keep track. I think the only way you can discern, is this my imagination, or is this really information that's valid to me? I think one way to discern it is by keeping track of how many times a visual that you have turns out to be accurate, and how many times it's symbolic, or how many times it's imagination.
I've experienced it all those ways, actually, and sometimes even the imagination will turn out to be like a lead onto something. It's like
Yes.
clicks, but very, in fact, I tell people, particularly when it comes to the sort of Norse trance prophecy, which I do in a religious context, not really as part of my psychic reading work, but I do it as a priestess. And I'll tell people, just you need to realize that things can be on more than one level. They can be both. They could be literal, or they can be symbolic, or sometimes we don't quite get what the symbols are. Like, I was listening to your story and going, your mother's house was on fire, but you were a mommy and your house was about to be on fire. And what your subconscious, what you picked up in your conscious mind was, mama's house is on fire.
Yeah, exactly. That's so true.
Yeah, and that's, symbolic. I mean, I think that's because our subconscious only has so it talks to the conscious mind in symbols. And sometimes, and other times, I've noticed that, I will see things in trance, and it's like they don't mean anything to me, but I have to remind myself it doesn't matter. It's what does it mean to the person that asked the question.
Oh, exactly. And that's so true. And if you think about that incident that I just mentioned too, it's interesting because I felt like my body responded before my brain even had time to respond. So it was such a startling visual that I was on my feet running out of the room before I was even fully aware of what I was doing. And I didn't even know, I didn't have an idea in my head like what I was doing or what my plan was or anything. My body was just up and running out, and I think it was completely 100% subconscious, like, find the problem kind of thing, where your subconscious is so much wiser than your conscious mind. And that so often happens, and that's how we get warnings and avoid danger. I remember once, just as I was going to sleep at night, I had a sudden visual that I was being run off the road by an 18-wheeler. And it was so frightening that I called my then boyfriend, who is now my husband, and called him on the phone and said, I just had this really frightening visual that this black 18-wheeler was suddenly just went to change lanes without any warning, and I was in this blind spot, and and it was crushing me against the guardrail. And so he said, well, in the morning, make sure you really are careful when you drive in to work, because I had to get on the highway and drive into work. And so, and I knew exactly from the visual exactly what lane I had been in when it happened. I was in the far left lane, and this truck was, next to me in the middle lane. So on my way to work, I was really paying attention, and I was looking for a totally 100% black 18-wheeler. And sure enough, I looked, I was constantly checking the rearview mirror, and then I see this black 18-wheeler coming up, next to me as I had moved into the left lane to get around someone, and I see it coming up, and so what I did was, as soon as it started to move up next to me, I slowed down. Thankfully there wasn't anyone close enough behind me that this was a problem, but I immediately slowed down, and then suddenly that person, whoever was driving that 18-wheeler, got into the left lane with no warning whatsoever. And had I not had that warning the night before, I would not have slowed down, and I would have gotten crushed against the guardrail. So it's wonderful. Intuition is so amazing. And there are so many people who don't realize it exists within them. They say, oh gosh, I'm about as psychic as a bag of rocks. I've heard that many times. And actually, though, people really are intuitive. Everyone is. And it just is a matter of it's like a martial art. It's just a matter of practicing and developing these skills. And it could save your life.
I think our culture also encourages people to, as children, we're taught to ignore the subtle hints and the intuition, where some cultures really encourage it.
That is really true. Some cultures are much more encouraging of it. When thankfully, because I had kind of an unusual childhood in the sense of intuition, and my poor parents didn't know what to do with that. They just didn't know what to do with it. And so with my kids, I wanted to really encourage it. And one thing we did that was really fun, and that they were amazingly good at, especially my youngest child. Are you familiar with what a radiometer is, or radiometer? Anybody know what that is? It looks like a light bulb, but inside it has a pin inside that's vertical, and on top of the pin there are 4 flags that are hooked together in an axle, like a spoke of a bicycle, with these 4 flags that are on the end of the spokes. So if the center of the axle is sitting on top of the pin, and one side of each flag is painted black and one side is painted white. And so if you shine a flashlight, for example, on this radiometer, the flags will begin spinning, because the black side is absorbing the light and the white side is reflecting the light. And some people say that it's actually also a heat thing, where the black is absorbing the heat, the white is reflecting the heat. And so it starts to spin. The force of the reflection and the absorption causes the flags to spin. So I would actually say to my son, who was like 5 at the time, I said, just stare at these flags and see if you can make the flags start spinning. And he could just make them spin like crazy anytime he wanted. And so every now and then with my students, when we're out of class and we're just having a meal together or something here at our center, we'll put the radiometer in the middle of the table and ask somebody if they want to take a stab at trying to make the flag spin just with their minds, which is a form of kinetic energy or psychokinesis. And so that's a really fun thing to do as well, to play with children and help them develop these things. And I think it's great to play games with kids that help develop their intuition, because I think as we keep moving forward into the rather unstable situations we're facing right now with global warming and crime and so many different things, I think that intuition is going to be a survival skill. The development of our intuition is really necessary as a survival skill for the future.
Well, for sure, we can see that there's some challenging times ahead. I guess I'm kind of curious, how can we practice some of this a little bit? Maybe, is there a book you recommend that talks about this? Is there any are there any exercises on your website that, kind of a sheet? Because I think a lot of us are interested, but we just really don't know. I mean, for example, when you're driving, you could imagine whether the next car will be blue or red, things like that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And that's something too you can do on a trip with kids, or you can just do it with your friends. Just try to guess the next, whether the next stoplight is going to be, red, green, yellow, or broken. Because every now and then we come to a broken stoplight. So you always have to plan for the inevitable or the unexpected. Yeah, that's definitely something you can do. You can come up with some exercises like this. One thing that you can do, there's a book called ESP for Children that gives some really fun things you could do with kids. I don't know if it's in print anymore. There's a book by Bevy Yeagers that is called The Psychic Paradigm, and she has a lot of exercises in that. And then I actually wrote a class that I taught at the International Remote Viewing Conference. I think it was in 2011. And if you went to the irva.org website, you can order that DVD. It's not very expensive, but it's a DVD, and it's just full of exercises that you can do to develop your intuition. And but you've given me a great idea, Paul. I'd like to write up a blog. I keep blogs and mini classes. I send out mini classes in my newsletters, and you can sign up for my newsletter by just putting your email address in a little box on my homepage at www.intuitivespecialist.com. And when you put your email address in there, then you'll get my newsletters. And I often include free classes in there. And I wrote a class that was called, I think it's called 15 Ways to Win the Lottery. And it has a lot of these types of tools in it, that you can use to try to improve your intuition. And actually, and then it tells you how to apply that in a way that could actually help you to win the lottery or use it on different types of things. And that's a practice that we call associative remote viewing. But it's really great because that's what they use to choose what stocks to buy and what stocks to sell, and to play the pick three successfully on a regular basis, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these are helpful.
Well, we might want to move into some of the other kind of tools and stuff that people can use, right? The pendulum, or how to use your body, or right?
Yes, let's talk about tools. Tools are fun because they're like toys, and all of us like toys.
All of us love toys, exactly.
All of us love toys, and there is, for example, using a pendulum, and you can buy pendulums online very inexpensively. They're like $7 a piece, and you can get some really beautiful ones as well. Jim, my husband, makes pendulums out of cottonwood that are really beautiful, that are also on the website. But pendulums are wonderful because what they do, they're like a direct link to the subconscious mind. And so depending on how you're using a pendulum, you can get basic yes or no answers with a pendulum. And then if you study radiesthesia, and there are actually some wonderful books online free on radiesthesia. And if you want to know how to spell that, it's R-A-D as in dog, I-E as in Edward, S-T-H-E as in Edward, S-I-A, radiesthesia. And radiesthesia is the ancient art of using a pendulum. It was something that was a part of the ancient Egyptian mystery schools. And back in those days, only the pharaoh and the pharaoh's family were allowed to study radiesthesia. It was like a secret, sacred art or skill. And there are some teachers out there who teach advanced radiesthesia techniques. To name a few, Dr. Dominique Sorel teaches radiesthesia. She lives in Colorado. There's a man in West Virginia, Raymond Grace, who teaches radiesthesia. And radiesthesia is an advanced use of the pendulum that is really a great way for dowsing and getting information through dowsing. And of course, dowsing itself is an ancient art. I mean, that even nowadays in the Bible Belt, we have farmers who use the witching stick and go out and find out where there's water, where they can dig their wells. And they don't consider that witchery at all. It works fine with their Christian belief system because their granddad did it, by golly. So
it's the same way in rural Ireland. The dowsers. When we were looking see about a well on another property that we were looking at, our friend said, "Oh, well, we call Billy," and I said, "Oh, who's Billy?" "He's the milkman." "Well, why would we want to call the milkman?" "Because he's the dowser." And and he came out, and I've told that story before, but he said that it's not considered anything to do with the occult or anything. It's just how people find water.
Exactly, and it's just it's like people don't consider it witchery to drive their car, and it's not witchery to use a stick to find water, or use dowsing rods to find water. It's just like driving your car. It's just a tool, and so tools are really great because if the autonomic nervous system, our bodies, just automatically will make the pendulum move in a certain way because it's our subconscious mind. It's linked in, knows the answer, and causes the pendulum to move in a way that we've already associated with either yes or no, or do it or don't do it, or here's water, or whatever meaning we've given to the movement. And so there's a lot of information on the internet about how to use a pendulum. I also teach a lot about that in my advanced remote viewing class and another class that I have called Beyond Advanced. You can even use a ruler as a tool, believe it or not, to use it on a map, and you can tell yourself that at the site that you're looking for, like let's say there is a missing child, at the site where there's a missing child, you're going to feel a bump on the map. And so you can drag the ruler from one corner or the top of the page. You try to do it in 3 different directions, like the top of the page to the bottom of the page, then from the side of the page across to the other side of the page. And each time you feel a bump, you create a line, and in doing that, you'll end up with a triangle, because you'll go from the top of the page, moving the edge of the ruler across. It's good to have someone hold the top of the page so the paper doesn't move. And you're pulling the ruler towards you with the flat edge going down the page, and suddenly you feel a little bump. You stop right there, take your pen, draw it across the ruler, and you've got a line now going across the page. Then you turn the map so that you're going from side to side. But again, you're pulling the ruler towards you because you've turned the map. So as you pull the ruler towards you, as soon as you feel a bump, you lay the ruler flat and draw a line. Now you've got one line going vertical, one line going perpendicular to the vertical line, or horizontally. And they cross at a certain point. But rather than just marking where they cross, you can go from one corner of the map. You turn the map so that you've got it kind of in a diamond shape, with one corner at the top and one corner at the bottom, and then 2 corners on the side. And you bring the ruler that way towards you again. And as soon as you feel a bump, you lay the ruler down and make another line across. And now you've created a triangle. And if you put a dot in the very center of that triangle, then you're saying, this is where I believe the missing person is. Or if you make a diagram of your house, this is where I think my missing keys are. You can do all kinds of dowsing with a ruler in that way. You can also use a pendulum in a really easy way. Like, let's say you've lost your keys. One day I got to work. I had a client that was going to show up in 5 minutes, and I was running late. And I got there, and I was unlocking things and turning on lights. And suddenly this woman walked in, and she said, "Oh, I apologize. I don't have an appointment, but I just had to meet you. I've lost some really important keys, and I was wondering if you could help me find them." And I said, "Well, I have a client that's going to be here in about 5 minutes, but let me show you really quickly how you can find them yourself." And I said, "How many stories is your house?" Because she said she was sure she had just misplaced them in the house. She said, "It's 2 stories." And I said, "Great, let's take 2 pieces of paper, and let's pretend that each of these pieces of paper is one of the stories of your house, and just put a cross across and divide the paper into 4 sections. by putting one line vertically, one line horizontally, evenly across the paper, and you end up with 4, quadrants. And then I showed her how to take a pendulum in her hand and hold it up over each quadrant, simply asking, are the missing keys in this quadrant? Now, to do that, the first thing you should ask yourself is for the pendulum to show you what yes is, what the movement for yes is, and what the movement for no is. So let's say that the pendulum swings away from you and towards you for yes, and side to side, left to right for no. So then you can ask first, are my missing keys on this floor at all? And you label one piece of paper floor, the bottom floor, and one piece of paper the top floor. Are my keys on this floor? No. Are my keys on this other floor? Yes. Okay, then you take that one and you simply take your pendulum over each quadrant and say, are my keys in this quadrant of the house? No. Are my keys in this quadrant of the house? No. Are my keys in this other quadrant of the house? Yes. Great. Now I've got a yes, and I can take that quadrant and divide it into quadrants, into smaller quadrants. Do the same thing until I get a yes, and then take that one and divide it into quadrants until I narrow it down to a very specific spot and find the keys that way. And so, it can be a really effective way. And what was so fun was that she actually called me later that night and said, I did what you said and I found them. And it worked like a charm. She found them immediately. And she'd been looking for them for months. So
Months.
yeah, so that was great. So we talked about pendulum. We talked about ruler.
Mm-hmm.
What else would you like to talk about?
Well, you can use your body.
Yes,
right?
and we've talked about the different ways of using your body: hot spot, flashes of light, color, sounds,
Warmth, right?
Warmth, yes, warmth, cold, rough, smooth. And then what about tarot cards? Some people listening.
Yeah,
probably...
what about cards? There are a lot of ways to do things with cards.
I was about to ask about that because I use both cards and I also use Nordic runes.
Nordic runes, those sound fascinating. I've never tried. I think I've tried runes one time, and that's something that would be fun to study. I think tarot cards are really fascinating, and I had only dabbled really until once when we had a friend who called us up and asked us to come spontaneously to go to her bookstore and do some readings. And I said, gee, do you think we should do that? And my husband said, well, I can read tarot cards. And I said, really? And at that time, we'd been married about 3 years. I was like, we've been married 3 years, and I didn't know you could read tarot cards. He said, yeah, I can read tarot cards. So we went down, and we had a great fun, actually 3 days of doing readings. And it was so much fun. And he would do a tarot reading while I was sitting there using remote viewing, and I would have my piece of paper and be writing things down while he was actually doing a tarot reading for the people. And as I've watched him do tarot readings now over the years, I've actually just kind of learned through osmosis from watching him, and then I've read a couple of books on it. But I think, again, that any of these tools, whether you're using a pendulum, a ruler, your body, or tarot cards, they're all tools just to access the information that your subconscious mind knows. And because your subconscious mind knows it, it's going to either pull out the meaningful cards because it knows where they are and what message you need to get, or it's going to help you interpret whatever cards you pull in such a way as to give you the message that you need or that you're seeking, because it already knows the information. So they're all just tools to access the information behind the subconscious mind or within the subconscious mind.
I've also noticed that I'm primarily read oracular cards, and I also said read the runes, which I learned later. And one reason my husband wanted me to learn the runes, he's got a PhD in Old Norse studies, and I haven't studied nearly that much, but we both are familiar with ancient sort of Viking religion. And it was because I would watch him read. And even though it isn't like tarot cards or even oracular cards where a lot of times there's something you can relate to in the modern world, they just looked like squiggles to me at the time. But he said he started asking me for interpretations, and I would be picking it up correctly, or at least what he thought was part of it, because the runes, there's only 24 of them. So you really have to use, I guess they work really well for people who are very, very intuitive and can because you have to sort of figure out what this really sort of ancient symbol with a lot of things that come with it, what part of that you need to use at that time. Whereas cards tend to be a little more specific, I guess is what I'm looking for. You still have to intuit what it means in a particular situation, but it's not quite as, I guess, esoteric might be the word I'm looking for, or vague perhaps.
Yeah, they're a little more specific.
Yeah, but the thing is, I was picking up some of what the runes meant, even though I didn't understand what they were, and it just reminded me of you remote viewing when your husband was watching, just doing the tarot, because it was like I was sort of getting sucked in, and how that happens, I'm not quite sure, but it was going on.
Runes are interesting. I've never really tried them. There's also my son, when he was in China for a couple of years, and he brought back these Chinese sticks that had, Chinese writing on them, and you throw the sticks like pickup sticks, and then in throwing the sticks, you read them the way they fall, like I guess like reading tea leaves or something like that. But whether you're reading tea leaves or sticks or runes or tarot cards or any of those things, it's all, I think, just a way of accessing information through the subconscious. It's all roads to all roads lead to Rome, and Rome is your subconscious mind. And whether you're using, no matter what tool you're using, it's all for.
Lori, it might be worth pointing out to some people who aren't aware that the standard remote viewing that was used or developed by people like Ingo Swann, what you were doing was creating a language so that your subconscious could basically communicate with your conscious.
Yes, that's the first phase of the remote viewing process is to create a symbolic language that's much like what Melody described on the runes, in the sense that it's a symbolism, and you create it consciously at first for some basic overall concepts, and then as you get familiar with it, how sometimes, Paul, I don't know how much you drive where you live, but a lot of people, especially in the United States, will have a route that they drive every day to work and home, and they get really used to that. And eventually it gets to the point where sometimes they're pulling in their driveway at night and they're like, I do not even remember driving here. I was lost in thought and somehow I made it safely home. And it's because our subconscious learns the way and learns how to get there and learns how to drive the car. And eventually the conscious mind can take a nap and, drift off into a daydream or a worry that you have. And the next thing you know, your subconscious has taken over the body and has driven you safely home. And so in that same context, you can create a language for your subconscious mind by actually creating symbols, really simple symbols. Like, let's say you make a short little straight line across that is your symbol for land. And we don't care what kind of land. We just, it could be marshy land or hard rocky land or mountainous land. It doesn't matter what kind of land. We're making this symbol to indicate that something we're considering, whether we're remote viewing a distant target or whatever, is that the essence of land or the gestalt of land or the idea of landiness is important somehow. So you can create one for the idea of air or space. You can create one for the idea of water or wateriness. And when I talk about water, for example, the idea of water, it's really almost like the idea of liquid, because it could be the sweat on someone's brow or the wine in someone's glass or an ocean or a river puddle, anything like that. And so maybe it might be just a short wavy line, just, something very short and wavy. The idea of this symbolism is you create it so simply, so basically, that just as you learn your way home and to work every day subconsciously, you could learn these symbols subconsciously and actually do them in your sleep, and get to the point where your subconscious mind could have you make a symbol very spontaneously, and that symbol can give you information about things. So we start out teaching our students 7 basic symbols for 7 basic ideas, which are land, water, airspace, motion energy, anything that's living or has had life that we usually refer to as bioorganic, anything that's man-made and anything that's natural. Those are 7 basic ideas that we give to all of our students to start out with, and they practice the symbols they create for those terms. And then what's really cool is you can ask yourself a question. Like, I had a young man who came to me for a reading, and I wrote his name down and very quickly did a scribble. Just, at the end of his name, my pen was already on the paper, and it just continued from writing his name into making a quick scribble. And just glancing at that scribble, it was easy to see that I had my symbol for land connected to water, connected to human. And so it just, as I glanced at it, it instantly had meaning for me. And I looked at this man, and now we are in Amarillo, Texas, and we are very far away from any large bodies of water. But I looked at him and I said, "Are you going to be getting on a ship and going across the ocean anytime soon?" And he said, "Yeah, that's the whole reason I came to see you, was because I had applied about 6 months ago for Carnival Cruise Lines, and I just heard from them today, and I'm trying to decide whether I should accept the job or not, but they want me to get on a ship and go to London." And so, it was so amazing, because that quick little 2-second write his name and do a quick squiggle actually gave me the information. So it's, that's just kind of a quick glimpse into the ways that you can use
Well,
this.
so the point, though, is a lot of people have been hearing on coast to coast, remote viewing, or, the term is kind of overused, right?
Yes.
And a lot of people have never even really heard an important point, which is this is how it's done. And in a sense, it's kind of like using runes or anything else. It's a way to get your subconscious to talk.
It's so
Yeah.
right. It's exactly right.
In fact, I was sitting here while you were doing that, talking about that, and trying to figure out which rune went with each element that you were talking about, because as soon as you said, land, well, that's a Sala, that's
Yeah.
homeland, and water, that's Laguj. Air, I'm having a little more trouble with, but my husband will be able to tell me immediately which one, and that's a good thing for me to get a connection to. I would probably pick it up. There's a number of rooms that have that as a possible element if I was doing a reading for someone and I had a context. But because there's only 24 of them, they don't all. But Issa, for example, would be ice. I'm like, yeah, this works. I see how this works.
Yeah, and if you wanted to get a better explanation of this, this is called ideograms. This technique for remote viewing is called ideograms. And there's a good basic explanation of it in Lynn Buchanan's book, The Seventh Sense. And that's Lyn, Lynn Buchanan. And that book I recommend to all of my students, because I find that the students who read that book before they come and take my course are miles ahead of the students who come in, without having read anything previous about remote viewing. But the cool thing about ideograms, the really cool thing about these symbols and getting your subconscious mind to talk, is that you can create them for anything. I just gave you the 7 basic ones that we use for the students when they first come in, but like a policeman could create one for danger or weapon. So he thinks he's going on a routine house call, and then he suddenly, in his hand, he does a quick ideogram and shows that somebody there is going to have a weapon, so he needs to maybe call for backup. Or, the real estate agent who needs one for damage, hidden damage in a house, or, things like that. You could just use it for any kind of overall concept that you needed information about. And then what's really neat, and this is, moving on into the course a little bit, but you also add a feeling component to the symbolic part of it. And that feeling component, like let's say I say that I have a wavy line that feels hard, and that's going to be my symbol for ice, or it could be for anything, but let's say I say that's going to be my symbol for ice, and that a wavy line that feels soft is my symbol for liquid water. The nuances of the symbols, as you develop them and practice them on a regular basis, start giving you more and more detailed information. And so ideograms become a really wonderful communication tool for the subconscious. And they are the initiation or the beginning steps to a full-on remote viewing session, even in the advanced stages. We get to the point where we have 3-dimensional ideograms, where you create a target site, a remote target site, out of clay or blocks or Legos or Toys. Again, toys. We're back to toys again, Paul.
Well, you can never leave them.
We gotta play. We're on with the inner child in all of us wants to play with toys.
Isn't the subconscious happiest with toys and chocolate?
I think so. I think it is. And one of the things too is that I like to tell people is don't get too hung up on your tools. Like let's say that the only thing I knew was tarot cards and I couldn't do anything else. Then I wouldn't be very versatile. And I always tell my students the greatest ability is versatility. And so I try to teach them to be really versatile so they can learn to use a variety of tools and a variety of techniques. And so I teach several different types of remote viewing, but the one that I focus most on is called controlled remote viewing. And it teaches a structure, and it's kind of like, have you ever had a junk drawer? Everybody has a junk drawer in their kitchen, right? The one that has the rubber bands and the pens and the paper clips and dental floss and that kind of stuff in it. And it's usually just looks like a jumble of junk. And so if you ever go by the drawer organizers and you stick that in there and then it has little dividers in it, so you have a little cubicle for your paper clips and a little cubicle for your rubber bands and a little cubicle for your dental floss, and everything gets all organized. Well, that's really what the controlled remote viewing process is like. It's like it creates a wonderful structure for all your psychic information that you're trying to gain about any certain place or event or person or whatever it is that you happen to be trying to get intuition or intuitive information about. And as that information comes in, the CRV structure allows you to put it in these little cubicles and organize your information. And so it's wonderful. It's like what we're doing right now. You're interviewing me and I'm giving you answers. And we call the CRV an interview and report methodology. And so, and now in one of my way advanced classes, it's called Beyond Advanced, CRV for professional viewers, I actually teach a way to use other forms of intuition and incorporate them into the CRV process, and even utilizing extended remote viewing or the visuals that you were talking about, Melody, where you have visual information that you want to incorporate into and see whether it's symbolic or see whether it's literal and incorporate it into your structure or your organization, your organizational framework, which is what I'm referring to as CRV. And so that works really well. It's amazing. You can get tons and tons of detail.
We haven't talked too much about psychometry.
Yeah.
You might want to say a few things about that. I mean, you were friends with Bev Yeagers.
Yes, and Bev Yeagers taught psychometry. That was one of her main tools, and one of her favorite things to do would be to hand someone who was skeptical. I was with Bevy at, I think it was the very first remote viewing conference that was ever held there at the Inn of the Mountain Gods in New Mexico. Did you attend that one, Paul?
No. Not that one.
That was a long time ago, and I don't even want to say how long ago because it makes me old. No, I'm joking. But anyway, so Bevy was there, and she had a reporter who was a real skeptical guy, and he was like, I don't know if I believe this stuff. So she handed him a rock from Dealey Plaza in Dallas and said, okay, just hold this rock and just tell me whatever's coming to your mind. And he says, I'm hearing the name Jack. I'm seeing, a violent death. He started getting all this information about JFK's assassination. And it was really fascinating. It made a quick believer out of him because he did it. Sometimes people will ask me to do a remote viewing demo for them. And I say, how about if instead I show you how to do it, really give you a quickie class, just enough to do a quick one. And you can see for yourself that it works because nothing convinces people as much as when they do it themselves. So in the psychometry, what the idea behind psychometry is that the human body is a battery. And this is Bevy's explanation. The human body is like a battery, and you have positive pole and a negative pole. And she usually suggests that your dominant hand, like if you're right-handed, the dominant hand then would be the positive pole, and then whatever hand is not the dominant hand then is the negative pole. And so the positive hand would be the hand that projects energy. So if I shake hands with you in my right hand, I'm giving you energy because that's my dominant hand. And then my left hand, I'm receiving energy. So that would be the hand I would use to hold an object and try to pick up information about it, which is what we try to do with psychometry. And in fact, interestingly, a girlfriend of mine was over for dinner last night, and she was talking about how she attended a workshop in which they basically did psychometry, but they didn't hold the object. Everyone brought an object, and let's say it was my turn, and I had my object, and no one could see my object. I had it hidden, but everyone would just try to tune into my object and give the history of the object without even touching it, just mentally tuning in, which I thought was a very cool idea. In Bevy's work, she would have people hold an object and get information. So Bevy did a lot of work with the police, and so people would they would have to get a license as a detective, and then like a private detective, and then they would have, because of their license as private detectives, they would be able to hold evidence. And so she would have them hold the object of, like, the murder victim's sweater, for example, and then they could see the whole murder, just by holding the object. It would be like putting a DVD into a DVD player and having it play the DVD. And to me, that makes perfect sense. And so for people who are skeptical, I say, what if what if it were 200 years ago and it was 1814 and I traveled back in time with a DVD player and a television, and I played a DVD for you, and you were back there 200 years ago? You would think it was completely magic. I mean, how can that possibly work? But what if inanimate objects truly are energy, as quantum physics has now proven, swarming masses of molecules, and they simply absorb strong emotional fields and record information that happens in something like an event like the assassination of JFK. And the rocks actually absorbed that information. And then by simply someone holding it in their receptive hand, their body acts as the DVD player, and the rock acts as the DVD, or simply reading that information from the rock.
Have you done psychometry with any results that you want to talk about?
Well, sure. One of the things that I found really helpful, and this would be another thing that we really want to make this interview as helpful as possible for the people who are listening, as practical as possible. And so one thing they can do is something that I did. I was very interested in psychometry, so I created a little spiritual development group. And we would meet, I think on Wednesday nights or something, at my office, and I think we had about 8 people in the group. And so we would get together, we would meet, and I would always ask everyone to bring an object with them. And then we would simply trade out objects, so that you were holding something that belonged to someone you had no idea anything. We'd try to trade them with someone you knew the least, and then try to hold that object and see whatever information came to you from holding it. And it was uncanny, the things that everyone would pick up, not just me. We would hold the object and just get a lot of great information. And then in using it in real life situations, and that's something we might want to discuss too, is talking about the difference between practice and what that means to the subconscious versus real life. But in a real life situation, we had a missing girl, and I got home from my day job at the time, and now my full-time day job is teaching CRV, but I got home from my day job at the time and walked in the door, and my then husband said, "Hey, we've got a situation. Could you do a remote viewing?" And I said, "Sure." So I sat down and I was doing this remote viewing, and visually I was seeing this young lady. I wasn't told anything. I wasn't told what I was remote viewing at all. But I saw this young lady standing with a young man in front of a small building, a small brick building, in an outdoor area that was very park-like, and it seemed like there was some sort of a festival going on. It was very active, and there were, just lots of noise and colors and music and sound. And I could tell that she was willingly with this young man. And so after I gave my information, I was handed a hoodie, and all I was asked was, alive or dead? So I was handed the hoodie, and the hoodie felt really hot to me. And I said, "Oh, alive, definitely," because I felt like a hot energy, like a live energy coming from the hoodie. And I said, "Oh, definitely alive." Well, the young girl came home 6 hours later and reported that she had been with her boyfriend for the past 6 days, and that at the moment I was doing the remote viewing session, she was standing in a park outside of the public bathroom, which was a small little brick building, and during the May festival at the park that was being held at the park. And so that was just a really quick example of a way to use psychometry in a very quick way. Just alive or dead. Is the person that owned this object alive or dead?
Okay. So we could just exchange things with friends or acquaintances, or like you're saying, form a group, right?
Yeah, just if you've got a few friends that are interested in exploring their own abilities in some way, and even people who are not into anything woo-woo or worried about woo-woo-ness, you can still just say, look, this is just a way to explore your own intuitive abilities. Let's just get together and bring an object, and let's trade off and see, let's see how this goes. Just see what you get. And then the person who owns the object needs to know a lot about the object so that they're able to give feedback. Once that person said, whatever they got, then they can give feedback. And, like one time I was holding a ring, and I was describing the woman that I felt had originally owned this ring and what she looked like. And then afterwards, I handed the ring back, and the woman I handed it to said, yes, this was my grandmother's ring, and this was, this is what she looked like. She did look like this, and she did look like that. And she gave me feedback, so I knew what I had gotten correct, and that was exciting for me. Feedback is like candy for the subconscious mind, because then we get to get very gleeful about being right.
Question, on the internet, there are tests, and I guess, probably software that one can buy that'll, be like versions of the old Xeno cards or whatever,
Yeah,
or different
exactly.
way. And by the way, I think those are the worst, because it gets so boring.
It's boring, and the subconscious mind hates boredom.
And as a matter of fact, this is just a personal aside. One of the things I find difficult is, like in remote viewing, you can have a simple target, and you can practice, right? It's only got water and land or something like that. But that
Right.
gets so boring at some point. You know what I mean? You should be getting better
Yes.
and better, but actually you kind of max out, because it gets a little bit boring to do such simple targets.
Yes.
And there are on the internet tests that you can look at, but again, some of them can be boring. What are your thoughts on that? I find the Xeno cards to be really painful, but
And
one that Larry, let me finish. One thing I found, though, that I did really well in and I found interesting was looking at a picture of somebody, and it was, is this person alive or not?
that's a great way to. There's a lot of things you can do that are not boring. And what's interesting, what I was going to say about Xeno cards, is a lot of really well-known, documented, the successful psychics do terrible with Xeno cards. So if Xeno cards were a measure of someone's psychic ability,
They're actually a measure of whether you bore easily or something.
Exactly, I think so too. Xeno cards are really horrible. And for those who don't know what Xeno cards are, they were originally developed, I think, by the Russians, and they're basically like one card has like 4 wavy lines on it, another card has a star on it, another card has a square on it, and they have like 5 or 6 of these different symbolic cards. And someone there will flip a card, and the psychic who's behind a curtain has to say what they see in their minds and try to determine which of the cards it is. And
I
it can
was
be
terrible at that. We got a set of those when I was in high school. It was like the game of ESP, and I was like way beyond statistically wrong
yeah.
all the time.
And that's what I found too, is that if your subconscious mind hates something, it will totally not want to do it. It will not want to play, and you'll do terrible at it. And what I have an interesting story along that line. There was a company out of California that was doing some research into precognition back around 1999, and they asked me if I would create 3 symbols, one very simple symbol for animal, one very simple symbol for vegetable, and one very simple symbol for mineral. So I created these 3 symbols, and then every day they would send me 500 numbers. Each number had 4 digits, and all I had to do was write the number and do a quick symbol. Write the number, do a quick symbol. It would take me about an hour to write all 500 numbers and do a quick symbol, and then I would send it into them, telling them whether I thought the symbol I did was closest to animal, vegetable, or mineral. So after a week of doing this, the man who's running the project calls up and is so excited, and he's like, oh my gosh, you accurately predicted the movement of the S&P 500 in the stock market with 98% accuracy every single day. And my then husband at the time had done as well as I had. He had also done 98% accuracy. He goes, do you know how far above chance that is? You correctly predicted the movement of the stock market, all 500 stocks in the S&P 500 every single day, 98% accurate. And he was so pleased. And apparently, animal had been the stock's going to go up, vegetable was the stock's going to go down, mineral was the stock staying the same. And so by simply saying animal, vegetable, or mineral, I was actually predicting the movement of the stock market. Well, what's really interesting is we did it again the following week, but this time we knew what the deal was, and we were 98% inaccurate, which is also way beyond chance, but not as helpful. Definitely not as helpful.
Well, that kind of gets to the point that your subconscious has to buy in.
It definitely does. Your subconscious
right? I mean,
has to buy in.
and so this is one of the things people say, well, if you're so psychic, why aren't you rich? Well, it's not that simple, is it? Besides the fact you might have to practice for 5 or 10 years to get very good, your subconscious may just say, no, I don't want to do that.
You know what I've been doing with my students lately? We want our students to practice their ideograms, their little symbols. We want them to practice targets so they can get a track record, so they can develop a database and see what they're good at. Because otherwise, it's just too easy to fool yourself and say, oh, I'm amazingly psychic, but you don't have anything to prove it. You don't have any data. You don't have, just so I'm always right. But, but the thing about practicing is that if it becomes boring and your subconscious doesn't want to play anymore, then it defeats the purpose. So I have a mentoring club. I actually have several mentoring clubs now. It started out as one and has now branched out into 3. But in these mentoring clubs, I get online and I'm actually teaching for 2 hours every 2 weeks. But in between, I've given homework to the students so they can be practicing and do things. But I try to make it really fun, and we come up with a lot of different ways to practice so that they're not just looking at pictures and envelopes all the time, which become like the Xena cards after a while. So we want to avoid the picture and envelope sickness that comes from just constantly doing boring stuff. And so we come up with all kinds of fun things to do. And one thing we've come up with is that the students themselves will make a list of things they would love for somebody to try to do some psychic work on or remote view. And there's fun things like I want somebody to describe the moon Europa that orbits around Jupiter, for example. One student submitted that. So everybody submits as many things as they can think of, and I write them all down, and then I make a folder for them on my desktop, and I call that the digital hat, because we're going to draw a target out of the digital hat and have someone view it. And then I've also assigned them someone to monitor them who doesn't know necessarily anything about the target, but is just there to help them stay within the CRV structure or whatever. And that becomes really fun because they develop a relationship. And their remote viewing skills have just increased exponentially, and they are having such a great time. And it's just keeping them really engrossed and really involved because it's just so fun. It's so much more fun than pictures and envelope. And Joe McMonigal, one of the really great remote viewers from the military unit, he's come up with a ton of potential targets he would love to view. He writes whatever it is on a 3x5 card, and then he has these boxes filled with 3x5 cards. And every single day, he picks a 3x5 card out. But he has his wife pick the card out, and they're in envelopes, so they're all sealed up, so you can't see what's on the card. And then he just does some psychic work or remote views for each day. And that way, if he has a paid target that he's supposed to be working for someone on assignment, he'll do that. But otherwise, he'll just randomly view what's ever on the card. And a lot of times it's simply a question that he needs help on in his personal life. And that way he's getting answers to his own questions, and it works out great. So there's a lot of really inventive things you can do to keep things from getting boring. Just a lot of inventive.
Can you give an example of how you would do that with a question to yourself? I mean, is that like, should I change careers and become a teacher or something like that?
Yeah, and what we try to do is we try to avoid yes or no, Because if you're going to do yes or no, you could just do a pendulum, right?
Right, right. That's kind of what I'm wondering is
Right.
how would you
So you'd
phrase
want
that in
to.
such a way that you could know
So
where, what you want to do.
right. So let's say that you're kind of restless at your current job, and you're wondering, should I change jobs? Should I? And if I did change jobs, what would I do? What's the best thing for me? You could write down, depending on what your criteria is. Like for some people, it might be, what would the job be? Give me a description of the job that would make me the happiest. For someone else, it might be, give me a description of the job that would help me make the most money. It depends on what people's interest levels are. But if it's the job that's going to make you the happiest, you write that on a card, you put it in an envelope, and you put it in your box. Now, if you were to just try to work on that, knowing that was the question, you're going to be heavily weighted onto whatever your conscious mind thinks, and it's going to get in the way a lot. So you are going to want to instead put a whole bunch of identical envelopes with a bunch of different questions in the box so that you never know what question you happen to be answering today. And then that brings us to the next step, which is describing rather than identifying. So you're going to just be listing sensory things like colors, textures, temperatures, smells, sounds, tastes. And you're going to be listing dimensional information like shapes, sizes, patterns, positions, measures, things like that. And then you're going to go on into describing other things, perhaps non-tangible things like, this one feels very religious, or this feels touristy, or this feels educational. And so you're looking for those kinds of words. And those things then help you. And you write this list down, and then you look at your list, and all of a sudden, when you look at it in the context of the question, once you take the question out of the envelope, when you're all done describing, you suddenly have a list there that totally describes the type of job that is perfect for you, that's going to make you the happiest based on whatever your question was. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So I don't know, but let's say the answer is that being a carpenter would make you the happiest.
Okay.
And then throughout the session, the remote viewing session, you're going to see all these things that basically describe working with wood.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
And putting
yes.
something together and finishing it and so on and so forth. And, at the end, you're going to realize based on all these descriptions that you've come up with that
exactly.
That's what it is. As you're doing it, hopefully you won't be realizing that, oh, this means carpenter, because then
exactly.
you get into the conscious mind, putting too much in. Actually, since we're on that, we might want to describe. You might want to give your thoughts on this, because this is a problem for me, and that is the conscious mind getting in the way.
And the conscious mind does.
And overriding the subconscious, and then getting overly analytical. Some of us from a technical background, scientific background, or jobs that are overly technical probably have this happen more than average. But have you got any thoughts or suggestions on that?
Yeah, I really do. And that is one reason that I teach controlled remote viewing, is it was developed to give the conscious mind something to do and keep it so busy, putting things in the right little cubicle in the organizational drawer that the subconscious mind doesn't have a chance. Lynn Buchanan teaches an analogy called the president of the company, where you think of your conscious mind as the president of your company. And the CEO walks in one day and says, hey, we want you to go on vacation for a couple of weeks. We're going to have somebody else run the company. The conscious mind, when the subconscious is going to take over for a little while in order to share intuitive information, the conscious mind is threatened because, hey, this is my territory, right? So in the analogy, the president, if he goes off to the Bahamas, he's going to be, checking in every 5 minutes. Hey, how's it going? What's going on? And they say, don't worry, we've got your son running the company. That's who's running it. Well, then he wants his son to succeed, but he doesn't want him to be so successful that he makes him look bad. So he's checking in and constantly interfering. And finally, they bring him back from vacation and say, instead, we've decided we're going to have you stack boxes at the dock, down at the docks. And you're going to be so busy stacking boxes that you're not going to have time to interfere. And that's what the idea behind controlled remote viewing is it's a structure to help keep that. So if you are going to, let's say you don't know remote viewing, You're not able to take a class, even online. So you're trying to figure out a way to keep your subconscious mind in the forefront and your conscious mind out of the way. One thing you want to do is you want to keep writing everything down and setting aside the nouns. As long as you set aside your nouns, later nouns might start having meaning for you. But what tends to happen is the conscious mind thinks in nouns and the subconscious mind thinks in descriptive terms. So let's say that, as an example that Lynn gives in his book, let's say that you're trying to describe something and you think that it's red, it's smooth, it's shiny. I know it's got to be an apple. But then it turns out that it's actually a fire engine, which is also red, smooth, and shiny. But, so that can actually mess up, can mess things up when you pick a name for it.
Well, what happens is then you go off on a tangent.
Exactly. And the tangent, we call that building a castle. You find something that is square, rectangular, and rough textured, and you think, oh, it feels like a block, a cement block. Oh, I bet it's a castle. And the next thing you know, you've built the turrets and the moat and the whole 9 yards, So you've gotten carried away and built a castle. I had a guy one time, he was doing a target as an exercise, and he saw the target was actually this kind of aqueduct or bridge, and it had these white pillars underneath it. And he picked up on these white cylindrical things that were vertical, and suddenly he turned them into the goalposts of a soccer game. Next thing you knew, we had the whole soccer team, the uniforms, everything, that he described. So he went off on this tangent on the soccer game and was quite disappointed to find out that it was simply these pillars from the aqueduct. So what happens is, I tell my students, it's like trying to drink out of a fire hose. The subconscious mind is blasting information at you so fast and so heavily, and you're trying to take a sip from this, and put it into some kind of words, and it just becomes overwhelming. So your conscious mind does the best it can, and it'll take a few perceptions and turn them into a noun. Oh, it's red, smooth, and shiny, therefore it must be an apple, and so what I usually suggest to people is, okay, take the word apple and set it aside. Just put it off to one side for now, and especially in the beginning. Now, later on, if you really get into studying this, you learn what to do with that term. But for right now, we're just going to set it aside, or maybe you put it in the trash can, and we're going to just keep going. But you've got to declare those things and write them down. That gives the conscious mind something to do and kind of scratches its itch and its need to be in control. Apple? You think it's an apple? Okay, great. I'm going to write that over here on the right side of the page. Now, I'm going to keep writing down the descriptors, and maybe you even mentally try to take a bite of the apple, and you feel your tooth go clunk, and it's metallic, and you go, oh, my apple is metallic now. Maybe it's not an apple after all. So you want to just keep setting aside the nouns. And so it's not that you're ignoring nouns or you're getting them and you're not writing them down. You want to write them down. You want to honor that they are coming in, but you just set them off to one side and just keep describing. So that's what we tell. I think in any intuitive process, if you tell yourself, I need to describe rather than identify, you're going to be better off and more accurate more often.
Is that similar with, let's say, cards or psychometry or other things?
I think so too. I think it is. But I've been having this discussion a lot with my students lately. So, several of my students actually have been professional psychics and are trying to learn remote viewing so that they can work more with police and things like that, and learn to work more in a professional setting, corporations and police and things. And we've talked about how oftentimes in doing readings, and I think Melody will probably really identify with this, in doing readings, it's almost like you're using a different part of your brain. So I was sitting down doing a reading, a mediumship reading for a man, and suddenly I saw white china plates with grapes on them. And I don't mean grapes that you can eat. I mean the plates themselves had grapes as part of their design, purple grapes. So I said, I'm seeing white china plates with purple grapes on them. Now, in a remote viewing session, I would take the word plates and I would take the word grapes and I would set them aside. But in this reading with this man, I said, I'm seeing, white china plates with purple grapes on them. And he said, oh, yeah, those are my grandmother's plates. And when she died, she left them to me. And that was the symbolism. That was what she was sharing to kind of let let us know that she was there, so to speak. And so,
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, I always feel like I'm using a different part of my brain. In fact, occasionally I'll get clients and things just are not working. And I'll say, look, just, I think that this isn't a really good match or whatever. And they'll say, well, a lot of times they'll just say, well, just keep trying. And then if I can get the click, it's like another part of my brain works. And it's even stronger if I'm doing trance work, because if the trance work, it has to happen. With the reading with cards or runes or pendulum, even, although I do pendulums mostly for time, because I'm not very good at time, and I know that I could bypass my conscious mind trying to make guesses by using the pendulum. We'll get closer to the subconscious. But in all three of those cases, it's like I can, again, I'm very feely type of thing and person, and I can feel a change.
yes,
But
and
it's
so
really working. That doesn't mean I never get anything without, I mean, it's not always, sometimes it really flows and it's really very strong, particularly in reading. And sometimes it's only just, it's kind of a struggle, but it always has to be there, at least just to a degree, or nothing's going to happen.
yeah, exactly. And I think that that's what you're pointing out is really important, because somebody asked me one time, how come when I'm doing a remote viewing session, the vision that I have isn't as accurate as it is if I'm doing a reading for someone? And I think the difference is that you can get immediate information. You can get immediate information when you've got somebody sitting right there in front of you. You get an instant feedback. And maybe there's even a little bit of cold reading going on with some people, who are really sensitive and who can read people's body language or pick up on their pheromones or whatever. And so they get instant feedback. And that's very gratifying. And so those pictures in your head, you're spitting them out your mouth with the nouns and all, and the person you're sitting in front of you is reacting with an either yay or a nay. Whereas when you're remote viewing, you don't get that instant feedback. You're writing stuff down on the paper, and the safest thing to do is to just set these nouns aside, and then later you learn how to break out the symbolism behind the noun and ask yourself, for example, I was working on a society. I had been asked, your target is a society. Describe the society, including their mode of dress, their belief system, their family, their culture, their politics, their economics, everything. And so I was working on it. One of the first things that came to my mind were Nazi SS soldiers marching. And I knew that this society was not Nazi SS soldiers marching, but I wondered to myself, at its most basic gut level, what do Nazi SS soldiers marching mean to me? And I thought, they're regimented, they're Germanic, they're disciplined, they're structured. It turned out that the target was actually the Amish. And so my Nazi SS soldiers marching actually, really made sense in a lot of ways. So that's the thing, is I think when you're doing a psychic reading, you're actually using a different part of your brain than you are when you're remote viewing. It just, to me, and the only criteria I'm basing that on is that I've done a lot of both now, and I have a physical feeling in my head that is very different when I'm doing one versus the other.
Oh, okay. See, I hadn't picked that up. I see what you're saying now, that the remote viewing actually seems to be different from the psychic reading.
It is. It is very different. And I wouldn't be able to actually tell you exactly how, but I just know that it is different.
That makes sense.
Where would cards come in versus, say, psychometry or something?
Well, I think that with each tool, you're using a part of the brain, and it would be fascinating to me if they were to hook up electrodes and actually show which parts of the brain are lighting up with the different tools. But I would bet that a different part of the brain lights up with, you'd probably have certain parts that would be similar or the same, but then I bet there's, maybe a light that goes off over on one side when you're doing tarot cards versus a light that's going off on another side when you're doing psychometry. I know that with psychometry, with me anyway, I'm actually having little visual things come to mind as I'm holding whatever the object is. And I'm just trying to spit what I'm seeing out to see if it makes sense to anyone. Whereas with tarot cards, it's more of a puzzle, like you're putting a puzzle together on a table and seeing, this fits this one in this way, and the way that they relate to each other. So they seem very different to me in that sense. the information that comes through is kind of ephemeral. And
Does it come through as nouns or?
I don't find it necessarily as nouns, but more like anecdotes or analogies. So you're talking to someone and you're like, well, to me, this means that there's a really overbearing person in your life that's male. That, let's say I pull a certain card and say, well, this seems like there's this really overbearing person that's really having a strong influence in your life right now and is actually obstructing things. And the way you know that it's obstructing is the position of the card in relation to other cards. So it really is like a puzzle in that things are, the way they relate to each other, the way they are positioned means a lot.
It's often kind of like teasing out a story. And some cards, like there's one of the decks I use is called a Psychic Tarot, and there's a card of a man that's holding his arms crossed and he's looking very stern, and I jokingly call that the card of the Irish husband. And it doesn't always mean that, but the number of times when I get that and I just look at, usually, obviously the woman I'm reading for, and I'll say that and they'll just laugh. Because it's like, yeah, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. And then I have to sense, I usually have a very strong sense either this is a good thing, he's very protective, he just wants to have his own way, or this is not such a good thing and that the woman is feeling very crushed.
Yeah, exactly.
And none of that is intrinsically in the card. But the card focuses that as the issue.
Yes, and also what I've seen too is that it seems like when you're using certain tools, the person that you're trying to help or the person who's sitting in front of you is often, through their own interpretations of what you're saying, helping themselves and giving themselves a reading. You're simply saying what's coming to you, and to you it might not mean anything, but to them it means a whole lot, which you said earlier tonight, I think, Melody.
Well, yes. Sorry. Yeah, in fact, that's actually why I use the decks I do, because I look at my role as a reader. I tell people even, I'm not trying to cold read you, but I am an empath, and a lot of times I'll pick things up, and a lot of times I can read better if I know something of what the situation is that I'm looking at, because the whole goal is for the person, particularly if they come to me, usually they have an issue and they need help and they want to work it out. And
yeah, exactly.
Sometimes they'll see things in those cards that mean nothing to me.
Mm-hmm.
But it means something to them, or it means the opposite of what that card would normally mean. Because to them, it's like there's a card called the Beast, which has a dragon on it in one of my decks, and usually that's the really horrible, deep, dark emotions that everybody has when they're 2 years old. But I've had a couple of people, one in particular, to whom the dragon was their beloved person in their life.
That's interesting.
So you get things like that, and it's like, oh, okay, now the rest of this makes sense, because the card will just be hanging out there, and it's like, I don't see why this is there. Well, I didn't have to see, the other person I'm reading for did.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and so I think that it's a kind of more of a team effort when you're working with somebody like that. It's more of a team effort.
Yeah, not all psychics read that way. That's just how I do it.
Yeah. And but I mean, like, as far as the team between the client and the reader, they're working together to help the client and to come up with the information that helps them most. And it seems to me almost like a joint effort, whereas in answer to your question, Paul, where you were saying like the difference between cards and psychometry, where psychometry, you're just supposed to just kind of give it all out there and see, if you're actually picking up on the energy of that object.
Right. You're just trying to get visuals and senses that are coming in from where that object has been and where it is in the matrix, basically.
Exactly.
Hey, I got, just as an aside, somebody might be curious about this, but what about the traditional things that we all hear about, palm reading and tea leaf reading and all that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's really, I have to tell you, this is kind of funny. I'm going to admit this. I used to, we are actually in the phone book in Amarillo, and they put a category in psychic readers, and I wanted them to put it under consulting. They were like, no, we have to put it under psychics. And so we'll get calls, from people. And a lot of times people call and say, do you read palms? And I always said, no, I don't read palms. No, I don't read palms. And one day I got a call, years have gone by, and somebody says, do you read palms? And I don't know why. I said, sure. So it was a group of young girls from college. They were like freshmen in college. They all came in, 4 of them. And I sat down with each one of them, took their hand in my hand, and just all this information came, and I was looking into their hand, but it really wasn't anything about their palm that was giving me information. I was doing what I always do. I was just connecting with my subconscious. And they were so thrilled. I mean, they thought that was the best palm reading they'd ever had, and from then on, when anybody would call and say, do you read palms? I'd say, sure, because I figured what they want is information, and they would come in and I would just look in their palms, and to me, it's like the same as tea leaf reading, the tea leaves form a little picture in your mind. I remember years ago, before I'd ever heard of remote viewing, I had just come back from doing all this social work and, Christian missionary work. And it turned out that one of my good friends that I'd gone to high school with had married a guy. They'd gone to Japan as missionaries and then ended up back in the States. And he was looking for a job walking down the street back in the days of the 900 numbers, when you get the 900 phone numbers. And he struck up a conversation with somebody who said, you're really gifted. I'm going to talk to my boss. And the next thing he knew, he was working for, at that time, like this was back in the 80s, he was working for something like $40,000 a year in a 900 number room with a whole bunch of people wearing crazy get-ups, according to him, reading crystal balls and tea leaves and all kinds of stuff. And he was working as a psychic, on over the telephone. And so he came one night. He was traveling through Amarillo, and he asked if he could stay in our home for the night. And I had this ball, this glass ball in my cabinet that it was a gift from my mother when I moved in to this house. And so he was like, oh, you have a crystal ball. Have you ever read it? And I was like, oh, no, I don't. It's just an ornament. He's like, oh, man, let me teach you how to read a crystal ball. So he grabs a piece of Christmas paper, wrapping paper, and he smushes it up and puts it behind the crystal ball and says, hey, this is just like, when you see dragons in the clouds or, anything like that, where you just use your imagination and you see the wrapping paper design through this ball and you just make up information. So I'm going to have a question in my mind, and I want you just to make up a story based on what you're seeing in this wrapping paper. So I had never done anything like this at all. This was totally foreign to me. And so and I'm just humoring him. And so I'm going, ooh, waving my hands over this ball and playing, really acting out the part. I said, oh, I see a green room, and it has green walls, and it has like antique furniture and an old grandfather clock. And there are 2 brothers, and they're very swarthy and dark-skinned with thick, dark eyebrows. And one of them is involved in a love triangle, and there's jealousy, the green gas of jealousy. And the other one is in a boat, and I see dolphins, and then I see him slumped over the boat, and there's blood. So this was my, dramatic. I was totally being facetious. And sometimes that's when things work the best, is when you don't take anything seriously and you just have a good time and fool around. Sometimes you can be uncannily accurate. And so he's like, oh my gosh. He said, my question was about 2 of my cousins that died very mysteriously. You totally described my grandmother's living room, green walls, antique furniture, grandfather clock. And both of them were very swarthy with the big eyebrows. One of them was involved in a love triangle and died from being gassed. He died from gas. And the other one died in his boat right off the coast of Miami, in the ocean. And so it was like, I freaked out at the time. It was so funny. I was just like, oh my gosh. And it kind of scared me, because I thought, oh, how could I come up with that from just fooling around looking at Christmas wrap through my my ornamental crystal ball, And since then, though, I've learned that, there's really nothing to be afraid of. We tend to be afraid of that which we don't understand. But in reality, all of this, there's a very scientific mechanism behind it all. And the parts that we can now understand through quantum physics are great. And the parts that we don't understand are also great, because we never want to totally expose the mystery. part of the excitement of living is being in the mystery and just enjoying the fact that there is a mystery, that we don't have all the answers. But we certainly don't have to be afraid of information that's coming to us.
Yes, for sure. That's an interesting story. We're getting to the end of the show. Any topics that you might want to cover before we wrap it up?
I think the main thing I'd want to share with people is to just, watch out if they're going to play around with it. Be sure to avoid the sorcerer's apprentice syndrome, because it can't, if, like, for example, if they try to, there's a local murderer, serial killer or something, don't get into that kind of stuff. You can really, pull in some information that can be psychologically damaging. So you want to just, practice with benign things that aren't going to hurt you in any way. I had a student who took my basic class, and then she was a massage therapist, and she had a client who was a lawyer, and she started telling her lawyer client about some psychic information she had picked up because she decided to remote view a series of crimes that were happening in her town. And the next thing, the lawyer was super excited, talked to the police chief, and the next thing she knew, she was involved as the official psychic on the case, and she was in way over her head, called me almost hysterical. It was just way too dangerous for her and too much on her emotionally. So I always say, stay safe. Don't try to read tomorrow's headlines or do that sort of thing. Use some of the examples we gave here and some of the references, the resources we've offered and I will put out a blog on just, with some of the things we've talked about tonight. And also remember to give yourself permission to be wrong. Don't beat yourself up when you're wrong, because the subconscious mind responds to emotion, and negative emotion can be interpreted as a reward as well as positive emotion. So it's kind of like a child who wants attention so bad they'll be naughty, because any kind of attention, even a spanking, is better than being ignored. So when you realize that any attempt you make to practice and develop your intuition is an opportunity to learn. So don't think of it so much as right or wrong, or mistakes versus success, or failure versus success, but think of it more like it's an opportunity to learn. And then take that opportunity and examine what you did and how you did, and maybe if you got something completely off, was it because you misread the symbolism, or you took nouns literally when maybe they were meant to be symbolic, and just kind of learn it that way as you go, and just take every advantage and every opportunity to practice as a learning opportunity, and keep data if you can. We keep a database on our website for our students so that they can actually score what they do, right versus wrong. I said this thing is red and it's blue, so that's wrong. I said this other thing was green and it is green, so that's right. You know what I mean? They actually keep a score, and that way they learn what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and they are actually learning as they go. They learn from what they do. And so it's just really helpful. So that's all I would encourage people is stay safe and just practice. If you're able to take a class, that's great. We're soon going to be offering online classes, and so if you're able to take a class, that's a great way to learn too. I prefer face-to-face. I think that's a superior way to learn. But if you can't do a face-to-face class, find a reputable teacher. We'd love to teach you, but if we can look, there's a lot of teachers out there. Find a reputable teacher. And one thing I think to look for in a teacher is make sure that whoever teaches you is still currently practicing themselves, because anybody who's not currently doing anything intuitively and not currently practicing whatever they're teaching is going to be teaching stale information. In order to teach well, you have to keep it alive and be continually growing and learning yourself as a teacher. So you want to be sure that that person has a great track record.
Well, I would recommend people put chocolate on the table.
Oh, chocolate's good. Chocolate is highly recommended. We usually have a bowl of M&Ms on every remote viewing teaching table.
Because I think you have to reward yourself. I really think that some people can be too harsh on themselves. Oh, I only got 80% right or whatever, and I'm no good at this. And that's just not the way to do it. Your subconscious really loves chocolate. Just put it
That is true. That is very true. I agree.
That
Reward
helps a
yourself,
lot.
be kind to yourself, treat yourself nicely.
I guess as we wrap it up, Lori, what's your website again?
www.intuitivespecialists.com.
Okay, well, listeners can check that out, and you've got some resources there.
Yes,
And
and we are constantly, continually adding new resources. We're going to be adding some free videos. We're going to be I've got a lot of blogs, free classes, links to articles in the newsletters, and we're going to be adding some very exciting intuitive practice aids. Do you remember Lynn's student aids? The little
yes.
programs.
Hmm.
He created them originally, I think, for Windows XP. And
Hmm.
one of my students volunteered to make a web-based version for both Lynn's website and my website. And they should be up on the website very soon. He's got them programmed, and all they're doing now is kind of prettying them up so they match the color scheme of the website. And we should have those up soon, where people can actually create their own ideograms and practice their own ideograms and have a virtual monitor program on there to help them when they don't have a live person there to help them monitor. This virtual monitor program will be helping them to monitor.
Sounds cool. Okay, well, Lori, we'll call it a day. Thanks so much for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with your listeners.
Okay, thanks again, folks. It's a wrap. Bye-bye.